One, we'll
Morning.
start now, and again, happy birthday to Marcy, and happy birthday to Jackie. I don't know if Jackie's here, but Marcy, we're very privileged. You're spending your birthday with us, and right after you got your second shot. Wow,
I know.
that's
I,
like a commitment. So
the only day that's not going to be a good one is the day this class ends because it's really inspiring. So I think education keeps us all young.
absolutely, for sure. All right, we're going to continue with the lesson on speech. And we covered the first three texts last week, where we talked about the importance of speech in Judaism, going right back to creation, when God spoke and the world came to be, and when breathed life into Adam through his nostrils. The sages interpreted that as giving human beings the power of speech. Jews are often referred to as the people of the book, and I submit also that we are the people of the word, because let's face it, you know what they say, three Jews, four opinions. We like to talk, and we have a lot to say, and what we have to say is considered extremely important by our sages. And that's why this unit is especially important, because out of all the ethical teachings in our tradition, there's so much devoted to the words that we use and how we speak, and to be extremely conscious of the speech that we utter. So that's our focus on the rest of, to finish this unit today, the lesson. And we're going to pick up with text number 4. And you recall, we ended up with a cute text last week, the text about weddings, that the reward of attending a wedding lies in the words of congratulations addressed to bride and bridegroom. And we mentioned how one of the few times you can utter a white lie in Jewish tradition is when you're speaking to the groom, to the bride. You're allowed to lie and tell the bride she's beautiful, even if she's not. So that was kind of a cute one. But text number 4. All right, Marcy, you're the birthday girl. You can please.
Okay, tell me what page or
46. 46.
page 40. Okay, I got it. Text
This-
number 4. I got it. Here it is. In the Mishnah, just as words can be hurtful in business dealings, so too can they be truly hurtful in other areas. In the Gemara, our rabbis teach, you shall therefore not wrong one another. Scripture refers to verbal wrongs. If a man is a penitent one must not say to him, remember your former deeds. If he's the son of converts, one must not say to him, remember the deeds of your ancestors. If he is a convert and comes to study Torah, one must not say to him, shall the mouth that ate unclean and forbidden food, abominable and creeping things, come to study Torah, which was uttered by the mouth of omnipotence? If he is suffering, afflicted with disease, or has buried his children, one must not speak to him as Job's companion spoke to him, saying, is not your fear of God the source of your confidence, your hope, and the integrity of your ways? Please remember, what innocent person ever perished?
Thank you. Well, the text, it seems to take a little bit of a turn here. Nowhere in the first 3 texts did it talk about business dealings, and yet they make an assumption here, just as words can be hurtful in business dealings. Well, how does that happen? What do you think, Marcy? How are words hurtful in business dealings?
Words are hurtful in business dealings because they can seemingly go back on a deal that was made, or put the kibosh on something that everyone thought was a done deal, and it doesn't happen because somebody said something that was misinterpreted. And words can also be the ruination of a business deal when you've got people involved with one another who end up in an argument about something that is totally different from what the business is, and you have a falling out that's personal but comes to be professional. I mean, words are like scissors. They're worse than swords.
Exactly. Take it to its logical extreme. How many family members, how many family businesses result in family members who don't even speak to each other because they have to fall out over the business? And so you see words can be extremely delicate in business situations. But here our text says it can be hurtful in other areas. All right. And so basically, what's the over? They give you numerous examples here. How are they all linked? What do they all have in common, these examples that they give about other areas? And in Hebrew, there's a term, ona at devarim.
I believe that you're supposed to think about what you say before you say it and consider the circumstances of the people to whom you're saying it. Unfortunately, in my own family, from a Seder 2 years ago, words were spoken by someone that should never have been uttered at all. And now there's a huge rift. And I find myself in the middle.
That's a general principle. The more specific principle is don't bring up anything in anyone's past that could be hurtful to them. And they gave several examples here. And the one that I think of most commonly is in Jewish tradition, when converts to Judaism, what should you never do?
You should never remind people of the past they had before they converted. They were different people. It's only since they've become Jewish that they have history in terms of the Judaic rules and laws.
Right. So that's the classic example of just not reminding someone of what they were before they made a transition to a new status. And I think this text is giving numerous examples where we should be very careful to do that. What's it saying, though, about harmful speech? It's saying that sometimes harmful speech is not with a malicious intent, but sometimes it's just thoughtless, careless words that we say to people without even thinking. And I think here Judaism is also, and this is amplified in text to come, but that most of the transgressions we commit with speech occurs unwittingly and just by being insensitive and thoughtless without any malicious intent whatsoever. And that we have to be so careful, and we have to think about what we say to people, because so often we don't even realize that what we say is insensitive or hurtful. And that, I think, is the overall point. Okay, thank you very much. Good analysis on that. Let's move to text 5 from the Midrash. This is a short one. Let's do the blessing while we have it. I swore I wouldn't forget it today, and look here, I almost did. Together, Baruch atah
Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mizvotav, v'tzivanu la'asod
Great
Torah.
Praise you, Adonai, our Creator.
Creator of the universe, who hallows us with commandments and commands us to engage in the study of Torah.
What page are we on, please?
47 now.
Thank you.
All right. Lydia, why don't you read text 4? It's very short.
Text 4 or 5?
Text 5. Text 5. Thank you.
This is a Midrash Rabbah Vayikra. Rabbi prepared a meal for his students. He brought before them tongue that was tender and tongue that was tough. They began choosing the tender tongue and setting aside the tough. He said to them, "Take note of what you are doing, for just as you are choosing the tender and setting aside the tough, so should your own tongues be soft to one another."
Okay. How does that text grab you?
To me, it means that do not criticize one another, and always select the good part of somebody's speech rather than focusing on the bad part.
Okay. How about that the tongue is a multifaceted organ. It can be used to utter things that are tender, and it can also say things, as Marcy alluded to, can cut like a sword. Tongue can be tough. So it can go either way, and this is telling us take care that your tongues be soft to one another. So the tongue here is used as a metaphor for speech. And we're probably all familiar with the little prayer that is said at the end of the Amida during the silent prayer, where Mar, son of Ravina, implores God, please guard my tongue from evil and my lips from speaking guile. And actually, it's been put to a beautiful musical setting it's a gorgeous song, but the message is that its speech is so important that there it is right at the end of the Amida and is foremost in our thoughts during the silent prayer. God, help us to be careful in our speech. All right, Lydia, anything to add on this?
Because, I was thinking that if you do not use soft words here in this context or words that are kind, you are insulting not only the person, but also God. And that reminds me of the prayer, may the words of my mouth and meditation of my soul be
My heart
acceptable to you.
be acceptable to thee.
Yeah, that's a good text too, because the words from our mouths are probably inspired by the meditations in our hearts, and one leads to the other. So it starts with what's in your heart to begin with. Good, very nice. Okay, thank you. Text 6. Let's see. Who do we have? Okay. I thought I saw David. David, are you with us?
You're muted, David.
David, he's good.
Okay. Text 6 comes from Proverbs. And does anyone have a scripture in front of them where they can read the text from Proverbs 18:21?
The story is told about the king of Persia.
Right, but no, let's read the biblical text first from Proverbs. Do you all have you should all, of course, have your Tanakhs with you for each class. This is from chapter 18, verse 21 in Proverbs. Anyone can find that.
I've got Mishnah 18:21.
Yeah.
Text 7. Is that
Okay.
what you-
Go ahead and read the text.
A story is told about the king of Persia that he became ill. The doctor said to him, "You will not be healed until the milk of a lioness is brought to you and your medication prepared." One person spoke up and said, "I can bring you the milk of a lioness. If you agree that I bring you the milk, then give me 10 goats." The king said to his servants that they should give the goats to him, the individual. They gave him.
Go ahead.
A volunteer went to a lion's den. A lioness was there nursing her cubs. On the first day, he stood at a distance and threw her a goat, which she ate. On the second day, he came a little closer and threw her another goat. He did so until he was playing with her and managed to get some of her milk. He then headed back to the king. And it was when he was in the middle of the journey that he had a dream. In his dream, he saw that the limbs of his body were boasting to each other and arguing with each other. The leg said, "None of the other limbs can compare to us. We would not have gone, he would not have been able to get the milk." The hand said, "There is none like us. If we would not have done what was needed, nothing would have been accomplished." Says the heart, "Had I not had the idea, what good would all of you be?" The tongue spoke up. "Had I not spoken up, what would we have done?" All the limbs responded to the tongue. "How do you dare compare yourself to us? You are in a dark place, and you do not have wisdom as do the other limbs." The tongue said to them, "Today you will say that I rule over you." The man heard all. He, the volunteer, went to the king and said to the king, "My lord king, here is the dog's milk." The king was enraged and ordered him to be hung. As he was going to be executed, all the limbs began to cry. The tongue said to them, "Didn't I tell you that you all lack real power? If I save you, you will all acknowledge my superiority. They replied, yes. The man said to the executioner, take me back to the king. Maybe I can yet be saved. He was brought back to the king. He said to the king, why did you order to hang me? You brought me dog's milk. What's it to you where the milk is from, as long as it cures you? And always, people refer to a lioness as a female dog. They took a sample and tested it and discovered it to be the milk from a lioness. The limbs said to the tongue, we are grateful to you. Thus you have it that death and life are in the power of the tongue.
Okay, thank you. That was a long one. So there, yeah, there's the verse from Proverbs, death and life are in the power of the tongue. And this is such a beautiful example of the imaginative creativity of the rabbis, the authors of the Midrashim, to come up with these stories that pack such a punch and just give you a beautiful lesson. I mean, who would ever think of limbs of the body having the ability to communicate with each other independently of the human mind? And yet this is how the rabbis conveyed this very important lesson. So it's a beautiful story, and it really conveys that, I guess, what do you think? Is the tongue more powerful than our arms or our legs? Or, I mean, what is this story about? Brains over brawn? What's the meaning of this, David, to you?
I think that the tongue transmits what you are to other people. The legs and the arms really do not. The tongues carry a lot of power in the way of providing information, providing healing, providing actually nourishment comes through the mouth. But I think that the tongue really reflects what's in your mind, and that's a way of transmitting what's in your mind to other people. You can argue, well, I could also write, but it doesn't carry the power, in my mind, that a tongue does, because a tongue can respond instantly. And the communication takes no time at all. As I'm talking to you right now, the communication is virtually instantaneous. And what you're hearing is what I'm thinking right at the moment. Sometimes I do the thing that was said before about the statement I always use, make sure the mind is engaged before you open your mouth.
Mm-hmm. So the tongue is really more powerful than any other limb of the body or anything else. It reveals what's inside of us. As you just said, it reveals the mind.
Rabbi, I have a comment on that. Sometimes a gesture is more powerful than the word. If you are, for instance, in a funeral and you go and talk to somebody, if you just give them a hug with your arms, you know, it's more powerful than something saying trite. So sometimes it's not always. So you have to use the mind that in any circumstances, the mind is what controls both the tongue and the limbs, in my mind.
Sometimes the limbs can communicate something more deeply than words can utter. Exactly.
Yes.
The tongue really is our ability to express who we are. I remember Babe Ruth once said, I never say anything at a dinner party, and that way people won't know how ignorant I am. You know, and so we can immediately tell whether a person's intelligent right away by the words they use. But something more important, we can tell what kind of person somebody is emotionally, and what kind of activity they have. Are they compassionate? You can tell this almost immediately from someone by talking to them. So we also reveal our emotional makeup as well with the tongue. And that's what this Midrash is saying, is that death and life are in the power of the tongue, because the very words we use can create life, and can bolster life and advance life. It can also bring death by the words that we speak. As a matter of fact, there's a teaching in Jewish law that if you embarrass somebody in public, it is as if you have murdered them, because their face turns red, and it's as if you have shed their blood. So think about that, you know, talk about death as being a death and life in the power of the tongue.
Rabbi, I'd like to just I'd like to comment on what Lydia said. There are times when there are not words that can express the emotion. Sometimes the words come out very hollow. And I think Lydia makes a very valid point. The physical contact, putting an arm around somebody who's in pain says a lot without speaking any words at all. Because sometimes, what do you say? You don't have the proper words to say.
Yeah, and how much more so we recognize the power of a gesture in this time of the pandemic, and that was more true than ever. Okay, thank you.
Rabbi,
Yes.
so that really is being lost today, especially with the young people, with texting. Everybody is texting or emailing, and so therefore they're using words, but you can't tell the emotions or through texting.
Mhm.
So I think a lot of that is lost.
Right, and expressions that are used are meant to shortcut the amount of words that you have to type in, and so yeah, the ability to communicate. Forget the art of letter writing that's been lost, but the art of just communicating is also being truncated because of texting and just tweeting and all those things. Thanks, Pearl. Good.
One thing that we developed an interview process at Merck where we were able to come up with certain questions and certain scenarios for prospective employees to see exactly their words, how they responded to certain questions would make us make some determination as to, one, were they hireable, and two, what position will we put them in the company based on some of their responses. So the word means a lot going forward in any situation, but it can be held, people can be held accountable to that as well.
Well, exactly. The phrase, their word was their bond. What your words are also a level of the amount of trust that someone can place in.
But I think this text is saying one more thing, and that is that you need to guard against the slip of the tongue. Sometimes you've got a little voice inside of you that says you really shouldn't say that, and yet you don't stop yourself. Here he had to backtrack and explain what he meant by dog. He knew it was going to anger the king, and then he had to explain that sometimes a lioness is referred to as a dog. And he didn't think it through carefully or clearly. I don't think he deliberately wanted to anger the king.
Right, that was part of his plan to enable the other limbs to see that he had the power. So he knew, in this case, he knew exactly what he was doing, but he had a plan to ameliorate the damage of his words. But you're making an excellent point, which is that we see that Lashon Hara, evil speech, is not just something that's premeditated and is planned to hurt someone. Most of the speech that we use that hurts people is inadvertent because we just didn't think it through and we weren't sensitive enough to the impact that our words were going to have. So that's what we really have to check, is that we commit Lashon Hara without even realizing it sometimes, or we realize it too late, or we're trying to keep ourselves from saying what we know we shouldn't, but we can't help ourselves and we say it and then we regret it immediately after it's said. So that's really important. So thank you for that. Okay, let's move on to text number 8. And how about Natalie?
Not here.
Not here, okay. Bunny?
Not here.
Not here. Shelley? Nope. Val? Okay, Rona, why don't you read?
The Holy One, starting there?
Mhm.
Okay, the Holy One, blessed be he, said to the tongue, all members of the human body are standing. You are lying down. All members of the human body are outside. You are guarded inside. Not only that, but I surround you with 2 walls, one of bone and one of flesh. What shall be given unto thee? What shall be done more unto thee, thou deceitful tongue?
Yeah, that's a powerful one. Want to comment on that one?
Well, I think he knows that that although the tongue could do good, it could also do evil. He's done everything I guess the tongue is encased in and protected by the mouth, by the lips, by the bone, by everything, and yet it has the capacity to do terrible things if
Yeah.
you're not careful.
Yeah, so God has done everything God can do to constrain the tongue from, being unhinged or uncaged or whatever. But ultimately, it's going to be up to us to rein in the tongue from doing damage. And that's the whole point of this text, is that God can only do so much. The tongue is lying down. The tongue has been shut off from the world. There's 2 walls surrounding the tongue. But ultimately, curbing our speech is in our hands alone, and that's good, because ultimately, we want human free will to be able to do what we want. We don't want to be automatons that are controlled by God to do God's bidding. We have the power to choose, but in terms of the speech, there's nothing more that is so important and can be easily lost in terms of what we say and the words we use. Okay.
And it also is like the story that we went through, I think last week or 2 weeks ago. The rabbi, the guy who spoke evil and ill of people, rabbi had him pull the feathers out of a pillow and then go back and try and collect them. The tongue, the mouth, if you do something with one of your other body parts, you can undo it. If you do something with, in terms of building, it's incorrect, you can fix it. But with your words, once they're out, the tongue is so powerful, and I believe that it's, you can't undo it as you can with other body parts.
Yeah, and that's
Does that make sense?
yeah, that's why that feather story is one of my favorites.
Yeah.
Shows dramatically that you can't always take your words
Can't
back.
take. Nope.
Yeah, in some financial dealings, you can fix it through a compensation, but you can't do that in terms of other things
No.
when the words are spoken. Great. Now we move to text 9 from Leviticus. This is a classic verse from the Holiness Code. Thou shalt not go up and down as a talebearer amongst the people. So that is a very important text talking about a rachil, which is one who gossips or peddles stories. The word rachil it refers to a peddler. So it's almost like someone who peddles in gossip is someone who sells wares. The itinerant salesperson who went from town to town with the wagon, and that's exactly what an equivalent example is with your speech. All right. So that is very interesting. A talebearer must resist gossiping so as not to bring about anger, violence, and possibly even murder. Because the second part of the verse says, thou shalt not go up and down as a talebearer in order to prevent harm or violence coming to the recipient of those words. All right, so we must not share information about another except in one circumstance. When can you share something that someone has told you in confidence that would not be considered gossip?
No.
Like, think of in a therapeutic situation. When does a therapist say, I have to tell what you just told me?
When it's a matter of life and death.
When it's a criminal action that has to be reported for the good of the community.
If somebody says they're going to do harm unto themselves, or if they're going to harm another, then you have an obligation to relay that information. But otherwise, passing on information that really is not yours to do can bring about anger, violence, sometimes even death.
What about the law, let's say with an attorney, attorney privilege?
Attorney
that doesn't come here, because if a criminal confesses to his attorney, the attorney can't go and say, and mention the crime that he confessed.
But that's different because he's already committed the crime. That is attorney-client privilege. But I think if an attorney knows that someone is going to commit a crime, I don't think that's protected.
Right, you're exactly right. And that's the difference. A crime committed in the past versus one that someone tells you they're going to do in the future. Difference. Okay. All right, let's move on. Text number 10 from Maimonides, from his Mishnah Torah. Okay, let's see, who has not, Steve. Steve, would you please read that text?
Sure. Who is Raquel, talebearer, one who carries gossip going from person to person and saying, so-and-so said this is what I heard about so-and-so, even though it is the truth, he ruins the world. There is still a worse sin that is included in the prohibition, namely Lashon Hara, and that is one who says bad things about their neighbor, even if they are telling the truth. But someone who lies is called a Motzi Shem Ra, a slanderer. Baal Lashon Hara, master of the evil tongue, is one who sits and says, this is what so-and-so did, such were his ancestors, this is what I've heard about them, saying bad things. About this scripture says, my God cut off all flattering lips, the tongue that speaks proud things.
Okay, thanks, Steve. So let me ask you a question. What do you think about this distinction between, passing on something that's actually true versus passing on something that's a lie? Are both of those really gossiping?
Yeah.
In a way, yes. No, they are, because you're putting words to somebody else's actions or whatever, or non-act, that you're passing stuff on about another person that should not be passed on.
Here's
No good. Yeah.
Okay. Someone else wanted to start to say something?
I just said hearsay. It's hearsay.
And Judaism seems to be saying that even passing on something that's true is still considered to be Lashon Hara. It's gossip, even if you're telling the truth. How much more damaging is if you're lying? Absolutely. And that's called Motzi Shem Ra. That's a slanderer. And they do a little play on words here. Okay, we know the word Motzi comes from the prayer over food. One who brings forth, Hamotzi. And here, Motzi Shem Ra means one who brings forth Shem Ra, a bad name. And a slanderer, what they've done here, they've kind of, they've taken the term Motzi Shem Ra, and they use the word Metzora. If you look at the Hebrew letters, Metzora means a leper. And it's comprised of Mim Tzadi Resh Ayin. And it takes the first two letters of Motzi Shem Ra and the last two letters of Motzi Shem Ra, and it puts them together. And it's in the Bible, people considered to evil speech. The rabbis said that becoming a leper was punishment for uttering bad speech. So if you talk bad about someone, there must have been, and you became a leper, that was the reason. That was the punishment. Leprosy was the punishment for evil speech. So they do this brilliant play on words here to get that point across. Now,
By the
I also have a comment. Sometimes even when you mean well and you report the good news, it's not your news to tell. So you should not say it, because it's only a matter of being considerate and compassionate of another person, to not broadcast something that does not belong to that person.
right, it's not, even if it's the truth, right? And someone who engages in telling lies about someone, that's considered leprous behavior. It's that bad. Good, thank you. All right, now we're going to move on to this is my absolute favorite text about Lashon Hara. It's one of those, gosh, if I had to pick 10 texts that have influenced me and stay with me, this is one of them. This is such a great teaching. Okay, who do we have? Who hasn't read yet? Let's see.
I haven't.
Okay, David, thank you.
Okay. Is this text 11?
Yes, it is. Yeah,
Okay.
and it's the Midrash again.
And if a person involves himself in a Lashon Hara, he makes himself worthy of death, as Lashon Hara is as serious as murder, for one who murders only takes one life, while the bearer of Lashon Hara kills three, the one who says it, the one who listens to it, and the one about whom it is said.
Oh gosh, what a great teaching. So, David, how does Lashon Hara kill these three different people? Let's look at the one that's probably the easiest. How does it hurt the one about whom it is said? We're going to go backwards.
Well, it's gossip, and it's not something that person would want to have said, or he or she would have said it. And it may not be in the correct context, and it can be all kinds of ways of hurting the person that it's about.
Yeah. So clearly, the first level is, gossip. Lashon Hara hurts the person about who it's being said, because their reputation is damaged, and in many cases, they're not even there to be able to respond or to defend themselves. Great. Now, what about the one who listens to it? How does
Well, they're the person's hurt, because it's sort of like, well, what am I supposed to do with this? I shouldn't have heard it. I don't know how to deal with it. It's hurting that person because it puts them in an awkward position.
Well, I think there's more to it than that. I think the person who hears it has power over the person speaking. He can simply say, stop it, I don't want to hear this, and just shut it down. So by
And walk away, he can walk away.
or just tell him to stop. But by listening, I think he's in a worse position than the person speaking, because the person speaking is going to speak, but the person listening can shut this down and say, just don't tell me. The third person about whom isn't even there to defend himself. But the only person who has some control over this, apart from the speaker who should be speaking, is the listener.
Okay, Rona, you're bringing up a big
Yeah.
point, which is that how does Jewish tradition look upon these three people, and who is the worst culprit? You would think that the worst culprit is the person who says the Lashon Hara. No, it's the person who hears it, because they can shut it down and say, I will not participate in listening to this, and you should be, whatever you're going to say, but it's exactly right. They can shut it down, and if they don't, they bear more culpability than the person who actually says it. That's kind of a surprise. You wouldn't think that, but that's how our sages looked upon this. All right. So,
Rabbi, can I ask a question? In the times we're in now, with all this talk about freedom of speech, a right to say anything we want to say, doesn't matter if it hurts somebody, we're just going to say it. And we had an impeachment trial just about that, about you have a right to say what you want to say. It doesn't matter. It's very hard to get somebody to be found guilty of slander and stuff. How do we make sense of all this, considering what we're talking about today and living in America with certain rights of speech and stuff?
well, I'm not getting into politics, but it's like that principle: you can't yell fire in a crowded theater, because the effects of your words can lead to a melee and can lead to complete chaos. So yes, we are American civil law has culpability for the words that you speak, no question. And this is a classic example of that. So yeah, that's a good point. But let's review now the one about whom it is said it's obvious how it kills them because their reputation gets slandered. The one who listens to it is murdered because what gets murdered is their impression of this person. Before they've had a chance to meet this person and make a judgment for themselves, their opinion is already prejudiced by the gossip if they listen to it. Finally, the toughest one, how does Lashon Hara kill the one who says it? That's probably the least obvious answer in terms of the three people that are killed by Lashon Hara. How does it kill the person who says it? Anyone?
Well, by remorse.
Guilt.
Remorse of what is being said once he's being made aware of what it is, by actual punishment from whoever is dispensing, punishment at the head of the group.
Yeah, I mean, let's remember that the source of gossip comes from an emotional state of a person, whether it's jealousy or inferiority, and even a person who delivers gossip again may not be in control of their tongue, and they may feel regret and remorse and guilt for what they've done, and so in a sense, the essence of who they are becomes a little bit less, and in that way they become murdered. In another way, are they not viewed lesser in the eyes of God? So the person who utters gossip is killed because they are seen as smaller people in the eyes of God by what they do.
Yeah, gossipers have very few friends.
Exactly. And they also probably view themselves as less than the highest vision of themselves that they have. So I love this text. I always think about it because it's so true. Lashon Hara kills three people, the one about whom it's said, the one who hears it, and the one who says it. All right, very good text. Text number 12 and 13, we're not going to really go over, but they bring about the issue of, are there certain situations where Lashon Hara is permitted, where it can even be beneficial or therapeutic to the people engaged in it? Can we think of any situations where, it's okay to gossip about other people and could even be healthy or beneficial? This is kind of we're going to just open it up. And when is it safe to engage in Lashon Hara, if ever?
If you have a person, an elderly person that's housebound, let's take the virus right now. People may not know this individual is housebound, may not have enough food or what have you, and they speak about the individual's condition. Is that gossip, or are they really saying something that could potentially be beneficial because somebody else may hear it who has additional food and could provide that to the individual that's housebound?
Well, that's an interesting question. What does some of you think about that? Does that qualify as impermissible Lashon Hara, or is that okay?
If somebody is wrongly accused of an act and other people know for a fact that he has been falsely accused, then it's almost their duty to speak up and in order to defend that person who has been accused. Is it not the same?
Well, I would think so. It's just like the obligation to inform the police of a crime that is about to be committed. It's for the ultimate moral good of the community, and I would think so. But let's look at it in the context of what goes on behind closed doors. Have you ever engaged in talking about other people with your spouse or significant other? I think that's something that we've all done. And this text is saying that there are times when that's even helpful. You come home after a hard day at work and you got into it with somebody, and you've got to get it off your chest. So you tell your spouse how horrible this person is and what happened. Rabbi Hammer is saying that's okay. Even though Jewish tradition might consider it gossip, you're allowed to do that because of the therapeutic value. Or should we never, ever speak ill of another person, even to our spouse or significant other? What do you think about that?
Ill is an interesting word. It may be for the other person's benefit, but that person doesn't want the information spread. So is that ill? Is it ill what the individual is doing by stating a condition? Because the one who is being spoken about is sensitive and doesn't want the information disclosed.
Okay.
I think it's well, especially a spouse or significant other. I think it's an intimate relationship, and it's good because you can therapeutically maybe work things out with what happened. So instead of keeping it inside and projecting it in another way, maybe talking about it would help you resolve it.
Okay.
And there's another situation that I can think of, and it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with sharing gossip with a spouse, and maybe it's not even considered gossip, but let's assume you did business with someone and that person cheated you and you can prove it and you know that. If you know someone else is about to do business with this cheat, is it wrong to warn this person and tell them what your experience was and say, be careful?
Yes. Yes, you are allowed to warn someone if they're about to be duped by somebody else. Yes, and Jewish tradition says that would be beneficial, helpful. I wouldn't even call it gossip. It's, you know, it's a warning to somebody else, and you are allowed to do that to protect somebody. Yes. Okay. But these last two texts, and you can read them on your own. They're kind of lengthy and too long for us to go into right now. But they really get us to be thinking about to kind of, you know, check how often do we really talk about other people, even to people behind closed doors who are our family members who will never utter this to anybody else. But again, think about the three people that Lashon Hara kills. How are we affected when we speak ill of another, even behind closed doors? So it's something to think about, and you know, really gets us to look at the power of the words that we use, even influencing the opinion of the person that we are having a problem with to our loved ones and friends, that it prejudices their opinions too, when maybe it's something that we should, you know, hold our tongue for. So this unit is so important because it really gets us to think about all of our interactions with the people that we cross paths with. Any concluding thoughts to this before we have a few minutes to start our next unit? And
How many people can say that they never said anything bad about someone, or never gossiped, or, you know, that I think it's part of human nature.
I agree with you, and I can't tell you how many times when I do an intake meeting with a family who's lost a loved one, and I would be performing the funeral, they said, he never said a bad word about anyone. Now, how many people can live up to that? That's pretty hard. I think you're right, Pearl. I think it is in human nature that there are times when we speak ill of others. And the whole point is to be able to control it and to put limits on it so that it does the least amount of harm as possible. Because, you know, we're human. We all have. That's why we have Yom Kippur. That's why there are several of the Al Chet Shechatanu Lefanecha, for the sin we've sinned against you, God, for misuse of our speech. Because we do it, and we know we do it, and we have to be able to put a curb on it. But it absolutely is human nature. And I think when someone says to me, well, so-and-so never said a bad word about anyone, I think that's sort of the inflationary remarks that we always want to paint a person in their best light. And, you know, it's just like a couple who said, well, Rabbi, we never argued in 50 years, you know, and we know that's not true. Everyone, you know, has disagreements. So yes, it's part of human nature. We all make mistakes. We all say things we regret. And our tradition says it's so important to watch that and keep an eye on the words that we say. Okay, thanks. Very good. let's move on now. We're gonna just, we have a few minutes, and as you know, every minute is precious in our 55 minutes a week. So I just want to introduce the next topic, which is organ donation. So if we could move to our chapter on that. The pagination you have in your book is a little different from mine. So Lydia, what page are we on?
74.
74.
So just to introduce the topic, there are two separate topics that are related to organ donation. And one is during life and one is after death. So they're very different situations that have given rise to different opinions from different rabbis, and that's what we're going to be looking at. The primary concern raised by the decisors of Jewish law, they're called poskim, when discussing organ donation during one's life, is the risk taken by the donor in doing so. There are limits to how much risk you should endure when you propose to give an organ, because we're all created in God's image and we are not allowed to inflict harm on our bodies. So there are limits on how much risk we can take when donating an organ. It should not impede the long-term quality of life of the donor. Now, it also comes into play how we determine in terms of death, because we have to decide when it's permissible for organs to be extracted. So we have these two different situations in organ donation, that during one's life, and then what is the most ethical way that organs can be extracted after death. So those are the two considerations in this unit. And here we come to what's kind of an ethical dilemma, where we have two conflicting Jewish values that sometimes come against each other. Now, what's the highest value in Jewish life? It's called pikuach nefesh. Anybody know what that means? Ever heard that term before?
Yep.
Saving a life. Pikuach nefesh is one of the highest values. That's the greatest thing you can do. We're told if you save one life, it's as though you've saved the entire world. So when you give an organ to save someone's life, it's the greatest mitzvah that you can do. But on the other hand, it comes in conflict with the mitzvah of preservation of life. You have to do a person has to safeguard their own life. And so how do you balance the two? You want to save a life, but at the same time, you need to preserve your own life. So these are the two considerations that come up when talking about organ donation during one's lifetime. Okay, so that's how we're going to start. Let's see if we have 2 minutes to go, and we'll just take a look at the very first introductory scenario. And you can see the unit is divided into the two parts of organ donation during life, and then part 2 is organ donation after death. So would someone like to just read the introductory scenario to give us something to chew on over? And we'll pick it up, okay?
I will.
Okay, thanks.
My name is Eric Greenberg. I'm 41 years old, married with 4 children, and I was recently approached to consider donating my kidney to save someone else's life. Basically, the rabbi of my congregation sent out a letter and made an appeal in shul, as there was an anonymous member of the congregation that needed a kidney. About 8 people responded, including me, but I thought kidney donors were like bone marrow donors, almost impossible to have a match. I called the hospital transplant center and let them know I was interested. Soon after, I did some tests and I was told that I was the best candidate, and over the past 3 months, I've been doing extensive research on the risks of kidney transplants. I know that I may be at greater risk of hernias and high blood pressure, and recently I found out that in order to donate my kidney, I'll have to have an open nephrectomy. Yeah, I really want to help, but how much should I risk to save the life of another person?
Okay, and therein you have the basic conflict. of pikuach nefesh versus preservation of life, which is the essential dilemma for organ donation during life. Okay, so we will pick up there next week, and I'll wish you all a good week. So thanks for attending this. And,
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay, and Rabbi Boxman, are you there? Is she still here?
Rabbi Miller is here.
Okay, Rabbi.
Hi, Rabbi Mueller. Yes, Rabbi Boxman stepped away. I stepped in. We'll take 5 minutes to stretch, rest, whatever you need to do, and we'll pick back up at 11 o'clock.
Okay, I love your background.
Thank you.
All right, see you all next week. Take care, everybody.
Thank you so
Take care.
much.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Mr. Ron. And make some chicken, Canada chicken stuff. I know you can, but you can.
All right, everyone. How are we all doing today? Yeah, one good.
We're
Good.
good. How are you?
Good.
Good. All right. I hope you all got the information that went out the roadmap yesterday.
Yes.
Good.
Mhm.
So as I noted in the message to all of you, we're actually covering two different chapters of the Crossroads book this week. I find these two chapters kind of blend into one another, and it's good to kind of get the full flow of it. So there's 8 texts total. I think we can cover that in our time. And this is going to be talking about the crossroads of history from the destruction of the first temple to what it means to become Jews. So there's chapter 3 and chapter 4, I believe, in your Crossroads book is where these texts will be coming from. They're also all on the roadmap, so you can easily access them there. So, as our background for today, the temple built by King Solomon, known by many of us as the First Temple, united the people of Israel around a central location in Jerusalem. Their identity was defined by their location, tribal heritage, and lineage. With the destruction of that temple and the first exile came the challenge of setting boundaries to solidify the group identity. Ezra led these efforts at the end of the biblical period. Later, the Hasmonean period witnessed the transformation of the people from being ethno-geographic to a religious people. The Judeans became Jews, allowing ethnic identity to transform into something religious, opening the door for a broader entry and a transportable identity that could survive outside the land of Israel. So I want to focus in on one term that's there, ethno-geographic. An ethno-geographic group is exactly what it sounds like. It's a group that is identified by its ethnic background and or its geographic location. So you could say, for example, of an ethnic geographic group would be to say someone who identifies as being Spanish. They're from the land of Spain. They eat Spanish food. They enjoy Spanish culture. That would be an ethno-geographic group. What happens is that over time, if you leave that area, the geography, what happens to your identity?
It diffuses.
It diffuses or it just disappears. You know, think about people who might have come from a country like Germany or Spain or somewhere else and come to America. For a couple of generations, they might identify as, oh, I have German roots, or I have Spanish roots, or I have French roots, or whatever it might be. But after a couple of generations, their identity is, I'm an American. And they leave behind those culture pieces, their identity shifts. A similar thing happens. Has happened in previous times. And so here we're going to see that that our people started out as the children of Israel, which was an ethno-geographic group based on their ethnic similarity and their being in the boundary of the land of Israel, being the 12 tribes in the land of Israel. But how do we survive if we have to leave that land and or we lose ethnic symbols like the temple? That's the great challenge. So that's what we're going to be looking at today, is how do we make that transition? How is it we survived all this time? So towards that end, let's see. There we go. Sorry, fixing something on my screen so I can see everything we need to see all at once. All right, so let's start off first with our text about the destruction of the temple. So we're going to go to our first text is Psalm 137. And let's have a reader for that. Go ahead, Pearl.
By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat and wept as we thought of Zion. There, there on the poplars, we hung up our lyres. For our captors asked us there for songs, our tormentors for amusement. Sing us one of the songs of Zion. How can we sing a song of the Lord on alien soil? If I forgot you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand wither. Let my tongue stick to my palate if I cease to think of you. If I do not keep Jerusalem in memory, even at my happiest hour. Remember, O Lord, against the Edomites, the day of Jerusalem's fall, how they cried, strip her to her very foundations. Fair Babylon, you predator, a blessing on him who repays you in kind what you have inflicted on us. A blessing on him who seizes their babies and dashes them against the rocks.
All right, so that last piece is a little excessive in some ways, but what is the energy here? What's the emotional feeling of the author?
Tied to Jerusalem.
Okay, so they're emotionally connected to Jerusalem. What else? What else are we hearing in this?
That we should never forget Jerusalem, that keep it in our memory for that generation and for future generations.
Yeah, it's a generation that's really tied to Jerusalem. And what's the reaction when the people of Babylon ask them to sing a song or to share with them some of their cultural experiences from the land of Zion? What's their response?
They're horrified by it. They can't possibly bring themselves to sing those songs when they're on alien soil.
Excellent. On alien soil. It's almost as if they feel like when they leave, their first reaction is when we leave the land of Israel, everything stops. We can't do anything outside the land of Israel. This is an ethno-geographic mindset. We only exist, our culture only exists, our people only exist inside the land of Israel. Outside the land of Israel, you're just tormenting us. And it's our obligation as we're outside to never forget the things that have been left behind. We can't ever acculturate or connect. This is a foreign place. We can't be ourselves here.
But there's another message here that bothers me, Rabbi.
Okay.
Which is, fair Babylon, you predator. A a blessing on him who repays you. In other words, I am not going to defend myself. I'm going to look for someone else to take action against you. Why am I so committed to Israel, unwilling to stand up in my own defense? Why am I looking for somebody else?
I see where you're getting that. I don't read it the same way, David. I don't think that they're unwilling to stand up. I think what they're acknowledging is they're not in a position of power to take down Babylon. They're praying that there will be divine retribution against Babylon. So first of all, in their mindset, and this is not where our minds are, in their mindset, Babylon coming in and enacting the exile and taking over the land is divine punishment for their having transgressed as a people. So Babylon is but the tool of God enacting retribution on them. In that same mindset, they say, we're too small, we're too insignificant, we can't impact great Babylon. But they're saying, for the suffering you've brought us, we certainly hope that some other great empire will come and bring suffering to you. That
But if Babylon,
fortune will turn against you.
but if Babylon is a tool of God, why are they not praying to God? Why are they looking for another power?
Well, but they're praying that another power does that. They're saying it's not in their control to do it. They're hoping for it.
Rabbi, I'm sorry, I am lost. I don't even know where you're reading from.
We are reading on the roadmap. It's the first text. It's in chapter 3. It's a reference to Psalm 137. So if you have a Tanakh, I don't think they included the text.
Okay.
Is probably not actually in chapter 3 of the book. It probably just says Tehillim 137.
Okay,
So
I
you
got
can
it.
either follow along in the roadmap or get out your Tanakh. But it's Psalm 137. It's
Okay.
one a lot of us have heard. It's by the rivers of Babylon. It's the psalmist basically writing and saying, as I sit here on the shores of the river of Babylon, I'm to remember always the land. My life doesn't exist outside the land. So much that even if I have a happy, joyful moment here in the land of Babylon, I still have to remember I'm upset. There's always this anger. There's always this disappointment. So that's one side of the equation when you're in exile. The other part comes in our next text, which is from Jeremiah chapter 25. And the prophet talks about the fact that this time of being in exile will not be forever. Steve, you want to take that next one?
Morning. Assuredly, thus said the Lord of hosts, because you would not listen to my words, I am going to send for all the peoples of the north, declares the Lord, and for my servant, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, and bring them against this land and its inhabitants, and against all those nations round about. I will exterminate them and make them a desolation, an object of hissing ruins for all time. And I will banish from them the sound of mirth and gladness, the voice of bridegroom and bride, and the sound of the mill and the light of the lamp. This whole land shall be a desolate ruin, and those nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. When the 70 years are over, I will punish the king of Babylon and that nation and the land of the Chaldeans for their sins, declares the Lord, and I will make it a desolation for all time. And I will bring upon that land all that I have decreed against it, all that is recorded in this book, that which Jeremiah prophesied against all the nations. For they too shall be enslaved by many nations and great kings, and I will recreate them according to their acts and according to their conduct.
Okay, so this text was written by Jeremiah before they're exiled. So what is his message to them? So we saw how sorrowful they were in the land of Babylonia. What is Jeremiah's message to them before they are sent off?
But they will return. They would be returned.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Eventually you'll return. Don't worry. Eventually there's hope you'll come back. So still at this point, they're able to define themselves by the land itself. You know, if you know that I'm going to be exiled, but you believe that you're going to be coming back at some point in the near future, that allows you to not be so downtrodden that you can't actually succeed. It means that you can still stay connected to the land. I won't forget you. I know I'm only here for a set period of time before it is that we are to come back.
And that he's going, and the Lord, he's going to bring many different he's going to defend them, and he's going to do a lot of things to make sure that they pay for what they did.
Yeah. So we're seeing this exile. We're seeing that the people are believing that God will bring the divine punishment. They feel kind of powerless in this piece, but they're very much defined as ethnogeographic. They're still tied to the land. Now, an interesting thing happens because not everyone, when they get a chance to go back, we're going to see not everyone goes back, which means that some of them evolve something different. And we're going to talk about that in a moment. Steve, did you have a question?
Why the 70 years? What is that significant? Is that was a lifetime at that point? What was the purpose? Does that number mean anything?
Anyone want to chime in?
I know that there's a significance to the number 7, as in 7 days of creation. There are other places that we've observed the number 7. I just keep thinking it's a multiple.
Mm-hmm.
Does it have to do with generational period and a new community with maybe a fresh outlook?
I think you're both on to important pieces of it. So you're right, Steve, to catch the 70 piece. And I think Rona's right in that there's whenever you hear a number that relates to 7 like that, 7 is the time of creation, 7 days of creation. And anytime you see 7, it means that at the end of the cycle, there's a renewal. Because what happens? 6 days of work, 1 day of rest, we start over. Then you have the sabbatical system, 6 years of working the land, 1 year at rest, and then you start over. So 70 could be 70 years this is the period it takes for the entire people to go through and then be regenerated. Because as Marcy points out, by that time, pretty much every generation that will have been alive has probably gone on now. There's a whole new group of people because we assume the generations are about 20 to 25 years. Anyone who's been alive has probably been cycled out at that point. So it's a new fresh start for the Israelites, a new fresh perspective. Because part of the problem was, and one of the reasons it's seen as retribution is that before the Babylonians came in, they were worshiping idols. They weren't listening to God. They were not listening to the prophets. They were going astray. So there's reasons for them being sent off and experiencing this. Well, let's take a look at some of the texts that come as they're getting ready for those 70 years now to come to an end. Let's take a look at our third text, which is from Ezra, one of the last prophets. Ezra is often credited with having been the one who brought together a lot of the texts of Torah, who was the final redactor, or at least in Ezra's period was the final redaction of the Torah texts, the first 5 books being brought together. And let's hear what Ezra has to say as they're getting ready to potentially return. Another reader. Thank you, Marcy. You're on mute.
Okay. When this was over, the officers approached me saying, "The people of Israel and the priests and Levites have not separated themselves from the peoples of the land, whose abhorrent practices are like those of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Egyptians, and the Amorites. They have taken their daughters as wives for themselves and for their sons, so that the holy seed has become intermingled with the peoples of the land. And it is the officers and prefects who have taken the lead in this trespass." When I heard this, I rent my garment and robe, and I tore hair out of my head and beard, and I sat desolate. Around me gathered all who were concerned over the words of the God of Israel, because of the returning exiles' trespass, while I sat desolate until the evening offering. At the time of the evening offering, I ended my self-affliction. Still in my torn garment and robe, I got down on my knees and spread out my hands to the Lord my God and said, "Oh my God, I am too ashamed and mortified to lift my face to you. Oh my God, for our iniquities are overwhelming and our guilt has grown high as heaven. From the time of our fathers to this very day, we have been deep in guilt. Because of our iniquities, we, our kings, our priests, have handed over to foreign kings, to the sword, to captivity, to pillage, and to humiliation, as is now the case. But for a short while, there has been a reprieve from the Lord our God, who has granted us a surviving remnant and has given us a stake in his holy place. Our God has restored the luster to our eyes and furnished us with little sustenance in our bondage. For a bondsman, we are, though even in our bondage, God has not forsaken us, but has disposed the king of Persia favorably toward us, to furnish us with sustenance, and to raise again the house of our God, repairing its ruins and giving us a hold in Judah and Jerusalem. Now, what can we say in the face of this, O our God? For we have forsaken your commandments, which you gave us through your servants, the prophets, when you said, the land that you are about to possess is a land unclean through the uncleanliness of the peoples of the land, though their abhorrent practices with which they in their iniquity have filled it from one end to the other. Now then, do not give your daughters in marriage to their sons, or let their daughters marry your sons. Do nothing for their well-being or advantage, then you will be strong and enjoy the bounty of the land and bequeath it to your children forever. After all that has happened to us because of our evil deeds and our deep guilt, though you, our God, have been forbearing, punishing us less than our iniquity deserves, in that you have granted us such a remnant as this, shall we once again violate your commandments by intermarrying with these peoples who follow such abhorrent practices? Will you not rage against us until we are destroyed without remnant or survivor? O Lord God of Israel, you are benevolent, for we have survived as a remnant, as is now the case. We stand before you in all our guilt, for we cannot face you on this account.
Okay. So a few historical pieces to note in there. I know it's a long text, but there's a lot of rich things there. So Ezra mentions the fact that they are able, a small group is permitted to go back because of the king of Persia. So Persia has taken over the area where the Babylonians were in power, and the Persian ruler has said, you know what, those Jews can go back to the land of Israel. They can go back to their holy land, a small group of them, to restart what's happening. Now note, it's a small group, meaning that not everyone is going back. So there are challenges to how do we go back as a small group and maintain our identity. So what's one of Ezra's solutions? What is he reacting to, and what is his way to solve it? What is he concerned about at the beginning?
I think the concern is both in the beginning and in the end. Intermarriage and dilution of the identity is one of the great sins. And now when they go back, I think he is again forbidding intermarriage, and also incest in the beginning as well. So for all of that, they were punished. And now when he says those who go back should not intermarry, should stay within the tribe, and they will grow within the tribe, and then you will bequeath the land to your children.
Right. So he's identifying here the problem being that when the people mix in with others, they're likely to go and be involved in their worship, be involved in their rituals, to be involved in things that are offensive to God and to the ethics and the ideals of the people Israel. So the way to stop them from doing that, and the way to maintain your identity he's afraid that if they start going off and marrying everyone, what's going to happen? They're going to disappear. They're going to fully assimilate. That going back to the land of Israel would actually be the end of them, because they're going to assimilate into all the other peoples who now live in the land. And that the only way to maintain their identity is by sticking together, not intermarrying, but maintaining their ethnic purity. And by doing that, they're going to avoid the trap of blending in so much that they lose themselves. So he forbids any form of intermarriage. And he's trying to strengthen their identity. Now, this is something that we still feel the effects of today. There is still an energy, a push to encourage endogamy, that is marriage within your cultural group, and that to marry people who are similar to yourself. Part of it is, how have the Jewish people survived for so long? Because in many places they didn't have a choice. Up until the modern period, it wasn't like you had a choice. You mostly were living in communities where Jews only married Jews. They rarely, if ever, married outside. And so that endogamy maintained an identity, and it kept them strong at a time and a place where they weren't the majority in the area where they were. You know, keep in mind, that's one of the big challenges here. They went from being the ethno-geographic group who was dominant in the land of Israel to being a minority exiled group in Babylonia, and now a minority group back in their original land. So they're back in the land, but they're no longer the majority. When you're not the majority, you wrestle with identity questions. You wrestle with maintaining your identity at a time and a place. It's not like today's modern world, where people are interacting freely and doing a lot more, and we're able to have social interactions, business interactions, and other things. It was very much, you stuck with your own group, and if you left your group, you weren't likely to come back. So in that very tribal mindset, there was a concern of losing the few Israelites who had gone back to this. So Ezra creates these boundaries. And as a result, they're able to survive being a minority and to start building Israel back up. And we take a look at our next text, Nehemiah. Nehemiah was one of the group people who went with Ezra when Ezra went back to the land. And Nehemiah is going to provide another perspective of what was happening as they're back now in the land of Israel, back out of Babylonia. Lydia, you want to read for us?
The entire people assembled as one man in the square before the water gate, and they asked Ezra, the scribe, to bring the scroll of the teaching of Moses with which the Lord had charged Israel. On the first day of the 7th month, Ezra the priest brought the teaching before the congregation, men and women, and all who could listen with understanding. He read from it, facing the square before the water gate, from the first light until midday, to the men and the women and those who could understand. The ears of all the people were given to the scroll of the teaching. Ezra, the scribe, stood upon a wooden tower made for the purpose, and beside him stood...
You can skip all those names. It's not going to help any of us trying to get through those names.
Okay. Ezra opened the scroll in the sight of all the people, for he was above all the people. As he opened it, all the people stood up. Ezra blessed the Lord, the great God, and all the people answered, Amen, Amen, with hands upraised. Then they bowed their heads and prostrated themselves before the Lord. Joshua, Bani, well, anyway, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, skip the names. It's okay. Just get to the
Explained the
Levites.
teachings of the people while the people stood in their place. They read from the scroll of the teaching of God, translating it and giving the sense, so they would understood the reading. Nehemiah, the Israel priest and scribe, and the Levites who were explaining to the people, say to all the people, "This day is holy to the Lord your God. You must not mourn or weep," for all the people were weeping as they listened to the words of the teaching. He further said to them, "Go, eat choice foods and drink sweet drinks, and send portions to whoever has nothing prepared, for the day is holy to our Lord. Do not be sad, for your rejoicing in the Lord is the source of your strength." The Levites were quieting the people, saying, "Hush, for the day is holy, do not be sad." Then all the people went to eat and drink, and sent portions, and made great merriment, for they understood the things they were told. On the second day, the heads of the clans of all the people, and the priests and Levites gathered to Ezra the scribe to study the words of the teaching. They found written in the teaching that the Lord had commanded Moses that the Israelites must dwell in booths during the festival of the 7th month, and that they must announce and proclaim throughout all their towns, go out to the mountains and bring leafy branches of olive trees, pine trees, myrtle, palms, and other leafy trees to make booths, as it is written. So the people went out and brought them and made themselves booths on their roofs and their courtyard, in the courtyards of the house of God, in the square of the water gate, and in the square of the Ephraim gate. The whole community that returned from the captivity made booths and dwells in the booths. The Israelites had not done so from the day of Jerusalem, of Joshua, son of Nun, to that day. And that was very great rejoicing. He read from the scroll of the teaching of God each day, from the first to the last day. They celebrated the festival 7 days, and there was a solemn gathering on the 8th as prescribed.
Okay. So what's happening here? This is a momentous occasion for the people, and it's a transformational one.
It sounds
Verna,
like
you look
like Sukkot.
like sounds like what?
Like Sukkot.
Right. So
Sounds like Sukkot, yeah.
it sounds like Sukkot, but there's something even deeper to it. They have the people come. The people ask Ezra the scribe. So you have the one learned person, the scribe, who's asked to come in front of everyone. All the people who are there gathered, and they say, take out the scroll. What are they talking about? He's taking out a Torah. And they're saying to him, tell us a story from the Torah. Read to us from the Torah. We want to know. What is he doing? They're establishing the norm of you read from the sacred Torah to know what your history is and what you should be doing. He's re-educating the people on the things that they had lost while they were in the land of Babylonia.
Mhm.
He's showing them, he's reading from the scroll, and in the scroll it talks about he's reading from the book of Leviticus. You have the holiday of booths, and you gather and you do your, and they're like, oh, well, it's a harvest time now. Let's do this. And so it's as if this is the re-indoctrination of the Israelites, but really what it is, it's transformational. This is changing them from being a people who relied upon the priests because they were just the majority everywhere. You just knew at this time the priest told you, come and bring your offerings. Suddenly now you have to reteach them, and you do that by reading from texts, from having times when you gather everyone together and you read them the stories. You're educating them. You're telling them what's happening. And who are the translators? It's the Levites, because they're the ones who benefit from this. They know that if the rituals are brought back, they suddenly have significance. When they're in the land of Babylonia, the Levites and the Kohanim, the priests, have no value because there are no offerings being made. There are no rituals. You come back to the land of Israel, suddenly they have meaning again. They have a purpose and a place. So Ezra is educating them on what to do. And at the forefront of that is doing the holidays, celebrating the rituals, and remembering what it is that we do as Jews. So they're changing the experience from being one of, this is our ethnic cultic group, not in the sense of cult like a negative thing today, but cultic meaning these are our rituals. Our ethnic group does these rituals. We come and we make offerings. Instead, now it's, we are a people, these are our holidays, and these are here's how we celebrate the holiday. It's changing it from being a cultic ritual to people who live there to being a religion that people can do anywhere. And you imagine if they're doing this in the land of Israel, this is probably what they brought with them from Babylonia. This is probably what they've been doing in Babylonia to keep the people educated when they've been outside the land, is reading to them from the sacred scrolls, educating them on what they should be doing. So we see this transformation from being the ethno-geographic group to becoming a religion, which is a remarkable transformation. And it's one that's going to continue to evolve over time. Look, this is a humongous crossroads for us, because if we don't make the shift from being ethno-geographic to being a religion and being a people, then we're gone. We can't survive what's about to come, because we know, looking ahead, we know what's going to happen in the year 70, the destruction of the Second Temple and complete exile spread out around the world for 2,000 years until 1948. We couldn't survive 2,000 years without Israel unless we had made the change from being ethno-geographic to being a people, to having a religion. That's very important for us. And it starts in Babylonia, and we're seeing Ezra doing that now for the people. So this is the first half of this. We've started to undergo this transformation. It really becomes important as we go forward, and we look at the next chapter in the book, chapter 4, the transition from being Judeans to being Jews.
Rabbi,
Yes, David.
there's one line I think to me, is very important. Is line number 2. On the first day of the 7th month, Ezra the priest brought the teachings before the congregation, men and women, and all who shall listen and understand. Listening was not sufficient. It was understanding, which was a key point. And for Jews also, education was important. Understanding was important. And that line right up front, to me, there's a lot of implication.
Yes, that's a very good point, and I think it's a very important one of what's happening there. That's understanding, it's comprehension.
Exactly.
At a time when most people were illiterate.
So
Most people couldn't study it by themselves.
So they depended on just one person, Ezra, to understand. Just one person.
Well, more than that, because if you remember the parts you were reading, Ezra was reading it. He was the scribe, and he then teaches others to be scribes after him, but it's the Levites who are interpreting it. So there are others who understand, but the majority of the people are illiterate. They're not familiar with this. They're relearning it. But this is part of where we get the idea of being a learning-centered community, because we value studying what it is that we're supposed to do and understanding it, not just dogmatically being told, here's the ritual, go do it.
Yeah.
There's a learning component to it. There's an understanding that's deeper than that. I mean, if we go ahead a little bit in history, so the Persians let the Jews go back, and they created the kingdom of Judea. This is where the people who lived there were Judeans. Eventually that becomes the term Jew. The kingdom of Judah, which is there, continues to grow and to thrive under the Persian rule until the mid-4th century before the Common Era. In 334, Alexander the Great conquers large pieces of the globe, including defeating the Persians, which meant that then Judah was under the control of Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great's philosophy, when he went in somewhere, you might have heard me say this during a teaching about Hanukkah, his philosophy was, whatever you are, however you celebrate, that's fine. All I care is that you pay me my taxes. So he was very much a hands-off ruler as he was conquering these huge areas, which meant that it gave him freedom because he wasn't worried about changing the people who were there to make them like his Macedonian Greek culture. He just said, you're under my rule now. You'll pay me tribute, but you can continue to live as you were before. So this worked for the people of Judah. They were fine. That's what the Persians had done to them. They said, okay, great, new management. We're okay. We keep going. Well, when Alexander the Great dies, his dynasty is divided up among his generals, and one of them becomes control of the land that is Persia, and one of them becomes the controller over Egypt. Ptolemy takes over Egypt, Antiochus takes over the Persian area, and eventually there's a lot of tension because it's all about geography. Location, location, location. And where is Israel located? Located right at the crossroads between the Middle East, which is the entry point to both Asia and Europe, and Africa. So it is the most desirable piece of land. This is why we have so many people trampling through our land, because we are the key point. If you control Israel, you control the flow of goods from Europe and Asia through Africa. And that was a major point. So what happens is you have conflict between the two groups who are there. Eventually, those who are in Persia under the control of Antiochus, one of his descendants, decide that they're going to conquer the land and Hellenize the people. This is the story of Hanukkah, right? They try to Hellenize us because they're tired of the people from Egypt sometimes fighting with them over it, and they figure if we Hellenize them, then that will inoculate them against the Ptolemy group from Egypt, and we'll have more control over the land. Not thinking about, well, gee, how will the Judeans feel about the fact that we're now Hellenizing them? So that's where we get into the story of Hanukkah. Now, here's the interesting piece for us. From a historical standpoint, there's not a lot of Jewish texts that exist during this time. In fact, the entire story of Hanukkah is not a biblical story. Hanukkah and other texts of that time period are what are referred to as apocrypha. So after Ezra and the people come into the land, that's essentially where a lot of the biblical canon stops. Some things happen after that. For example, the story of Esther and what happens in Persia happens after that. But most of the texts have already happened up to that point. Most of the prophecies, most of the sacred texts. And so it's more about maintaining them. The people who are putting together the Jewish canon, who are saying, what are our sacred texts, look around and say there are some texts that feel that they are too contemporary, that they're written in languages other than Hebrew. They talk about things that don't feel like they fit with the rest of the flow of the Bible. And so they're left out. They're referred to as apocrypha. I sometimes refer to them as the Bible cutting room floor. So it's the things that got edited out that didn't quite make it in. Now, what's interesting for us is that we would have lost those things. We would have lost the entire story of Hanukkah were it not for the church. Because while Jews didn't do anything with those texts, the early church said, these are the sacred texts that are the bridge from the, quote, Old Testament to the New Testament. So if you open up a Christian Bible, you'll see what they refer to as the Old Testament. You'll see a section that's listed as Apocrypha. It'll have the book of Maccabees. It'll have the book of Enoch. It'll have the book of Judith and others who were there, Bel and the Dragon, the wisdom of Ben Sirach. And then you'll get the New Testament. They don't focus a lot on those texts in most of their teachings, but they're there because they believe them to be the sacred bridge from the Old Testament to the New Testament, showing the arc that happened. So we only know things about that time period because of texts that we kind of gave up on, but thankfully they didn't. So we're going to look at this time period now through the lens of one of those series of books, namely the book of Maccabees and the writings of Josephus. So let's take a look now at the book of Maccabees. It's in your book. It'll be chapter 4, the first text, or it'll be the first text. It'll be I listed as Judeans to Jews text number 1. It's the 5th one that we come across in the roadmap. It's the same text either way. So I want to read for us this first book of Maccabees.
Okay, I'll read.
Okay, thanks, Rona.
It starts with the following is a copy. Okay.
Yep.
The following is a copy of the inscription. On the 18th day of Elul in the 172nd year, that is, the 3rd year under Simon the high priest, prince of the people of God, in a great assembly of priests, people, rulers of the nation, and elders of the region, the following proclamation was made to us. Since there have often been wars in our country, Simon, son of Mattathias, descendant of Joab, and his brothers have put themselves in danger and resisted the enemies of their nation, so that their sanctuary and law might be maintained. And they have thus brought great glory to their nation. Jonathan rallied the nation, became their high priest, and was gathered to his people. That is, he died. When their enemies sought to invade and ravage their country and to violate their sanctuary, Simon rose up and fought for his nation, spending large sums of his own money to equip his nation's forces and give them their pay. He fortified the cities of Judea especially the border city of Beth-zur, formerly the site of the enemy's weaponry, and he stationed there a garrison of Judean soldiers. He also fortified Joppa, Yaffo, by the sea, and Gazara, Gezer, on the border of Ashdod, a place previously occupied by the enemy. These cities he settled with Judeans and furnished them with all that was necessary for their restoration. When the people saw Simon's fidelity and the glory he planned to bring to his nation, they made him their leader and high priest because of all he had accomplished and the justice and fidelity he had shown his nation. In every way, he sought to exalt his people.
Okay, let's pause there. It's a long text. I want to make sure we get to all the different pieces. But how are they referring to themselves in this text?
Judeans.
Okay, so they're Judeans. And who are the Judeans? It's not a hard question. Who are the Judeans? They define themselves as
People of God.
The people of God.
well, they're the people of God, but they're the people who live in the land of Judah. They're referring only to themselves. They're seeing themselves as we're defined. This is that ethnogeographic mindset again. We're defined as the people who live here in this land. So they're referring to themselves as Judeans because they're so connected to the land. And we're seeing here pieces of the Hanukkah story that Simon was one of the ones who fought against the Greeks and he's given his honors. We're seeing elements of that. I don't want us to get caught up in how does this relate to the Hanukkah story, but understand this is them talking about what's happening in that period. And what's important for us to really hear is how do they identify themselves? They identify themselves by being people who dwell in the land of Judah. Now, what's interesting is we're going to see a change in the way that the language is written and how people observe, because they're talking about we live in the land of Judah, we defend the land of Judah, and therefore we are the people who are doing all of our rites and rituals. This is similar in modern times to the distinction you should be making between an Israeli and someone who is Jew. Someone who is Israeli lives in the land of Israel. They could actually be an Israeli Arab or an Israeli Jew. They live in the modern state of Israel. Someone who is a Jew lives a lot of places, has a sacred connection to the land of Israel, might even be connected to the state of Israel, but isn't necessarily an Israeli. And part of what happens in the broader conversations, we know this, is what happens when the Israeli government does something that people don't like. Who do they blame?
The Jews.
All Jews. They make the assumption that anything the state of Israel does, all Jews must be a part of it. But we know there's a distinction. Similarly, this is 2,500 years ago, 2,300 years ago, you see there's a distinction that should be made between Judeans and Jews. And this is our evolution. We're not just people who live in the land, we're people who can live anywhere, although some of us do live in the land and have a connection to it. Let's take a look at the next text. So this is the next one's from the second book of Maccabees. Now, if you've ever studied the New Testament, you know that the New Testament is filled with a lot of epistles, a lot of letters. In the Hebrew Bible, you don't find letters for the most part. That's one of the reasons why the books of Maccabee didn't make it into the Bible, is that they have this format of being letters. And this is a letter written in Greek. It's also in Greek, not Hebrew, which is another reason why it's kicked out. But it was written to the Jews living in Egypt. So it's acknowledging that there are Jews outside the land of Israel. And this is where we're getting that broader identity. We're not just Judeans, people tied to the land. We are people living in different places. So let's pick up with this next one. David W., you want to read the next one? Just unmute.
Text 2, is that
Yes.
where you mean?
Judeans to Jews, text 2, second Maccabees.
Okay, not long after the king sent an Athenian senator to force the Jews to abandon the laws of their ancestors and live no longer by the laws of God, also to profane the temple in Jerusalem and dedicate it to Olympian Zeus, and the one on Mount Gerizim to Zeus, the host, to strangers, as the local inhabitants were wont to be. This was a harsh and utterly intolerable evil, Because the Gentiles filled the temple with debauchery and revelry, they amused themselves with prostitutes and had intercourse with women, even in the sacred courts. They also brought forbidden things into the temple so that the altar was covered with abominable offerings prohibited by the laws.
Okay, pause for 1 second. I just want you to hear, what are the things he's concerned about? It's interesting. Before we are concerned about the land, about the military strongholds and things, what is this text concerned with?
Profaning the temple.
Right, with religion,
The
religious iconography, and with religious desecration. So it's not as much focus on the land as it is on the religion, on the faith, and what's happening to the different temples and holy places that are in the land. Okay, keep going.
No one could keep the Sabbath or celebrate the traditional holidays, nor be called Jew at all. Moreover, at the monthly celebration of the king's birthday, the Jews, from bitter necessity, had to partake of the sacrifices. And when the festival of Dionysus was celebrated, they were compelled to march in his procession wearing wreaths of ivy. Following upon a vote of the citizens of Ptolemais, a decree was issued ordering the neighboring Greek cities to adopt the same measures, obliging the Jews to partake of the sacrifices and putting to death those who would not consent to adopt the customs of the Greeks. It was obvious, therefore, that disaster had come upon them.
Okay,
Thus,
the last part is just a graphic story about what happens to two women who circumcise their children and how they're punished. I wanted to focus in, because we're going to skip that story. Don't even look at it. So I want us to think about what is it that's happening here. We're making this transition from being, again, ethnogeographic to being about what? How do they define themselves? What's the term they even use here?
Jews.
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 Suddenly they're Jews. They went from being, they're concerned about the Judeans to now we're concerned about the Jews. And how are the Jews identified? By their religious practice and by their willingness or unwillingness to participate in rituals relating to other gods. So this has gone from being an issue of we're defending our land to we're defending who we are. We're defending part of our identity, our faith, our belief. And we see that in the next text from 2 Maccabees, our short one. Judith, you want to read our third text here? 2 Maccabees 8:1. Just unmute. Judith? You're on mute still.
Okay. Judah also named the Maccabee and his companions, went secretly into the villages and called together their relatives and those who continued to follow Judaism, enlisting a force of about 6,000 soldiers.
So this is a short text, but this is the crux of the transformation. So we know Judah, right? We know the name Judah Maccabee. By the way, Maccabee just means hammer. He was not the soft, friendly guy who was like going around. He was a rough soldier. And Judah and his companions went secretly into the villages. And what do? They reach out to the people who identified by what?
Their practices.
Right. Who continued to follow Judaism.
Yes.
So it wasn't just people who were Judeans. It was those who believe, those who kept the faith. And this is an amazing distinction. And this is what brings us to the next level. We make this change from being focused on the land to being a people who have a certain set of beliefs. And this is where we start to see the transition. You know, thankfully, they kept these apocryphal texts. So this is where we see the transition from being Israelites or Judeans to actually being Jews who believe in Judaism. Pearl.
Yes, I want to know this is in Persia. Were there Jews left, or people, the ones in the beginning who went to Judea and became the Jews? Were there those that believe and were still Jews in Persia?
Absolutely. So you're talking about those who like were exiled the first time. What happened to them if they didn't come back? They stayed and they created communities. That's where the large and thriving, what we refer to as the Babylonian Jewish community and the Persian Jewish communities, they trace their roots back for 2,500 years to that period of the first exile. They were the communities that stayed there. They were the communities that developed that model that we saw Ezra doing of you read, you teach, you study, and that's how you propagate our beliefs. And it's in Babylonia that they start having, because they don't have a temple there, they have the Beit Knesset, the house of gathering, which becomes the root for where the synagogues come from. They have the early proto-rabbis are all from Babylonia because they're studying their texts, they're talking about them, they're learning them, and they're then coming up with the Midrash. All those teachings, all the early rabbis were all Babylonian. So that all developed there and then moved into the land of Israel. You have competing centers of Judaism between the land of Israel and the land of Babylonia, as we'll see a little bit later. So yeah, the Jews stayed there, and some of them surely assimilated. That's just nature. But the majority of the community was able to continue on and thrive. And up until about 1948, when a lot of the Arab countries expelled Jews because Israel declared its independence, those communities had been around for over 2,500 years. And people had been in those same places generation after generation after generation.
Well, doesn't Iran still have a large Jewish population?
Very,
Wow.
very small. Very small. It used to have hundreds of thousands of Jews. Now they have a couple thousand, and really they're just too old, too infirm, and unable to leave. When the Iranian Jewish community stayed longer than any other in the Middle East, but when the Shah was taken out of power, a lot of they refer to themselves as Persian Jews, not Iranian Jews. A lot of the Persian Jews fled because they could see the writing on the wall that it was fundamental Islam that was coming in, and that they were going to be perceived as infidels and opponents of the state, and they feared for their lives. So a lot of them left. But like the Jews from Iraq and Yemen and other places who had been there for thousands of years, all were kicked out of their homes and basically told, you must leave now, or you're going to suffer the consequences of Israel declaring its statehood in 1948.
So who does have the largest amount of Jews in that area?
Right now?
Yes.
Probably Iran, only because there are none. I don't know. There's maybe a couple hundred in Iraq, and maybe, if any, left in Yemen. So I would say probably Iran, but I wouldn't. It's an unusual community because they basically have had to subjugate themselves entirely to the ruling Islamic parties, to the point that they are occasionally asked to make anti-Israel, anti-Zionist statements so that the Iranian government can point to it and say, look, the Jews are against Israel. They're pretty much just barely getting by. The few that live there still. All right, so to bring this back though, we've become Jews. Mazel tov. We now celebrate Judaism. We have a different identity. And we're going to see it in the writing of Josephus. So if you haven't come across Josephus before, Josephus, otherwise known as Yosef ben Mattiyahu, he was a Roman Jewish scholar, historian, and hagiographer. He wrote his seminal book was called Antiquities of the Jews. He was essentially an assimilated Roman Jew. So he had roots in the Jewish community, but was a part of the upper echelon Roman society. So he had access to things that the average Jews did not. And he was seen as an expert on the Jews. And he's writing now, he wrote in the 1st century of the Common Era, but he's writing about events that happened long before him. And he's telling the history of what happened to Hyrcanus, who was one of the early leaders after Judah. And he says, Hyrcanus captured the Idumean cities of Adora and Marisa, and after subduing all the Idumeans, permitted them to remain in their country so long as they had themselves circumcised and were willing to observe the law of the Jews. And so out of attachment to their ancestral land, they submitted to circumcision and to having their manner of life in all other respects be the same of the Jews. And from that time on, they've continued to be Jews. Think about that text for a moment. It is so out of the realm of our thought of what it means to be Jewish and our own concept that we think of conversion to Judaism as an active, positive choice by the person who is joining. And here you have a story from Josephus that after the Maccabees succeeded and after they came into power, they actually went and would conquer places and forcibly convert the people to Judaism. It's a very different mindset. It adds in a whole new component, the idea that people can convert to Judaism, much less be forced to convert, that it's a belief, it's a religion like others. And that being a religion, not that I'm endorsing the idea of going and forcibly converting, not in the least. But what it shows is that there's now a different view of what is a Jew. A Jew is not just someone who lives in the land of Judah. A Jew is not just someone who is part of that tribe that lived in Judah. A Jew is someone who shares their beliefs. And you can join with the Jews wherever they are. They have a history, they have a legacy, they have a culture, but you can join with them through a process that you can actually become one of them. It's a very important crossroads moment for us in our history. And as we look back over these two chapters we've studied today, we see that lineage and cultural rituals were once used to solidify group identity and clarify boundaries. That's what Ezra was doing. You can't marry outside the group. It's only endogamy. You have to follow these rituals. This is what you do. And he was unifying the people around that. But the people then evolved from being an ethno-geographic group to a religious one. That conversion becomes part of the Jewish experience, and the modern concepts of nationality, ethnicity, and religion all stem from this time period that we've been studying today. We covered a huge time period, but one major event. We have now transformed from being Judeans, from being Israelites to being Jews. And that identity is going to carry forward from this point and be really the focal element of our identity for the last 2,000 years. So we've come to a great place. Any questions before we wrap up for today?
I was wondering, Rabbi, whether at Yom Kippur, when we do the Kol Nidre, whether people are reciting the Kol Nidres to regret those who had been forced to convert, and that applies to this time?
To the best of my knowledge, Kol Nidre dates later than this period. So I don't think that they're necessarily invoking that idea of those who are forced to convert. I have to say, the idea of forced conversion was really, I don't know of any other examples outside of Josephus claiming this. We don't see examples within Judaism. We see one example in the Torah, in the story of Dinah, which is a complicated story on many levels, of that tribe being asked to circumcise themselves and join with the tribe. But the idea of forcibly converting an entire nation or entire groups of people is something that we don't see for the most part, across Jewish history. So I don't know that Kol Nidre is about that piece of it. Kol Nidre is more about the idea that if you are making an oath, and you're making an oath in the name of God, which is what an oath traditionally was. It wasn't just, I promise you this, I promise in the name of God that I will fulfill this. It was releasing you from that from a theological standpoint, because otherwise you have somehow failed God by not completing that oath. So Kol Nidre was kind of a cleansing of the failed oaths that you had made for yourself. It wasn't necessarily about changing identity.
Rabbi, do you think the speaker tonight will be addressing because this is fascinating that you brought up to me about the editing room and how the Christians kind of brought it over. You think this is something that she'll address tonight?
I don't know if she's planning to address it, but someone could certainly raise the question, or I can raise the question with her, of how do the Apocrypha fit into the conversation about how Jews and Christians interpret sacred texts? I think that's a great question to pose tonight.
Yeah, because I haven't heard
to get that in there for her.
Okay, thanks.
That's certainly a very challenging time. I mean, a text to read about that time.
Yeah. It is. And look, I think this goes to the conversation about is every Jew responsible for the action of every other Jew? I don't think any of us are comfortable with the idea of forcibly converting an entire nation. Although, if Josephus is right, some of us might be Idumean in our ancestry. Who knows if they were converted and stayed that way? But while we're not going to be comfortable with that, that doesn't mean that we have to say it was the right thing. There can be pieces of our past that we say that was the wrong thing to do. You know, there's an interesting story to connect that to is there's a group called the Khazars. And according historically, they were the Khazars, their king invited in a Christian leader, a Jewish leader, and a Muslim leader and said, I want my people to find what is the right faith. And after all three of them made their presentations, chose Judaism and converted his entire country to Judaism. There are many scholars today who believe that the Khazars are the roots of the Ashkenazic Jewish community, because there was no large Jewish community that was existing in Eastern Europe, but the Khazars were the most likely, if they all converted and became Jews, that's the most likely origin for a lot of the Ashkenazic Jewish community. Interestingly enough, an entire converted community. So what's interesting about them is they chose Judaism, but they joined en masse, and over time have become genetically indistinguishable from other Jews because we practiced endogamy for so long of only Jews marrying Jews that our genetic makeup has a particular path to it. But it's interesting that there have been other groups that have converted as large groups. There's also stories about groups from Uganda and other places who converted as large groups to Judaism and maintain that today. So in fact, the Ugandan community that exists today underwent a mass conversion a couple hundred years ago under similar circumstances to the Khazars. And they've been thriving there since then. The Abu Yadaya, I'm close. That's the name of their group in Uganda. Fascinating group. All right. We've seen this transformation. We're going to let this sit in our minds and process. I do hope some of you will join us tonight at 7 o'clock for Dr. Levine, Dr. Amy Jo Levine from Vanderbilt University, a brilliant professor of Bible, one of the most engaging speakers on the topic of Jewish-Christian relations and tonight she was speaking about how we read the sacred scriptures differently from each other and where we can find common ground. So that'll be tonight at 7 o'clock as the next part of our speaker series. And that link went out by Zoom. It's a webinar tonight. We'll be recording it, so you can watch it on Zoom, on Facebook Live, and we'll be posting the video in the coming weeks as well.
The last reminder that went out said, see the message from Zoom, and I can't find it. Can somebody just resend that link for tonight?
I'll see if I can find it and I'll get it to you, Rona.
Thanks.
Sure. All right. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.
You too.
Thank you, Rabbi, for sending this the day before. It was very helpful.
Yes,
True.
Glad to do it.
True. And
okay.
can you send the link tonight to all of us?
Sure. I'll just forward that to everyone. I'll hit a reply all to what went out today. Did everyone get the message today about the Zoom link for this?
Yes.
Yes.
So, Rabbi Boxman, I'll just hit reply all to that message and put the Zoom link for tonight.
Good. Thank you.
Not a problem.
Thanks.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.